Before you turn down the lights, Sol, I need to interrupt you for a minute. This is a certificate of appreciation presented to Sol Libes in grateful recognition of your 10 years of service as Program Director, Princeton PC Users Group, Clark Walker President. That's for you, sir.
Wow, thank you.
And don't spill anything on it.
What?
Don't spill anything on it.
Can you take this? This is my wife, Lenny, by the way.
Okay, that's good. You know, Sol, you didn't mention TCF. You might say a few words about that.
Okay. How many of you have built your own computer? With a soldering iron? No. How many of you have written your own operating system? No. One. Okay. Well, I'm going to be going back to those days. Actually, this title is from a book that I had written many years ago. The Origin of the Computer Hobbyist. The book that I wrote was the origin of the microcomputer species. And here I just changed it to this. And I wanted to pay homage to some of these very early computer hobbyists. And these were people that were doing it before personal computers were introduced. Okay? So let's see if this works here. Oh. This works a little different than what I'm used to. Actually, this is one of the first computer hobbyists that I ever encountered. He died just a few years ago. This is Conrad Zeus, and this was a system that he built in his parents' living room back in 1936. And it was a digital computer, and constructed all from relays that were telephone company relays. And look at the clock speed on it. 1 hertz. 1 cycle per second. Okay? But it could do quite a bit. And later on, he went on to found Zeus Computers, which was a German manufacturer, and all large mainframe type computers. Okay. Let's see. This actually is not a hobbyist built computer. In 1956 at MIT, they had a government contract to build the first transistorized computer, and let's see, does the mouse pointer work? No, it doesn't. Okay. This is, and then they encased transistors in the same envelopes, glass envelopes, that they used for vacuum tubes, because transistors back then were very delicate things, very easily affected by heat and temperature and humidity. But after MIT Lincoln Labs was finished with it, they turned it over to MIT, to the graduate students there, and the students used it in the Model Railroad Club, and they wrote programs for it, so it turned into a hobbyist computer. In 1962, Charles Molnar built a very nice small system that he showed other people how to build, and there were 24 people actually that signed up and took a workshop with him over the summer and built this computer way back in 1962. The first computer game that was created by hobbyists was actually created for a DEC computer the PDP-1, the first computer that DEC had built. And it was a space war game that played on a graphics display. And very primitive game, but nonetheless, a computer game written by hobbyists, student hobbyists. In 1966, Steve Gray, who lived right here in New York City, started publishing the Amateur Computer Society newsletter, and he published it for 10 years. And when he closed it up in 1975, there were 200 subscribers to that newsletter, and I was one of them. And every month we got the newsletter, and with all sorts of things that other hobbyists around the country were doing, building their computers, where to find parts. Because back in those days, during the 60s and into the early 70s, best place to find parts for computers were in the junkyards. There were several stores right here in New Jersey that sold obsolete computers. We were all building things from these obsolete parts. It was the easiest way and the cheapest way to do it. This was the first computer club that was started, and it was started right here in New Jersey by Claude Kagan. That's Claude right down here. And he started the club in his barn that was in the back of his house. And actually, you can see it's a barn because he also had animals. There's a donkey that was also in the barn. And what he had were old computers that had been discarded by companies, and he moved them into his barn. And here you see a group of high school students that were working on. This was a data point vacuum tube computer. I don't know where he got the power to run that thing. Apparently he had it operational. He also had a lot of other equipment. This was a DEC PDP-8. This was about, I think, around in 1970. And this was a very early, have any of you worked with the DEC PDP-8? Oh, okay. Well, and this is a very early version of PDP-8. And these are, what we see here are a rack of cards, logic cards that plugged into a backplane here, and there was another backplane here just like this, so there must have been several hundred cards with ICs. This was already an IC computer. I think it used RTL's type logic circuitry. In later versions of the PDP-8, it all fit into this one case here. And you could pick up a thing like this at a flea market. Ham radio operators ran, and in junkyards that specialized in electronic equipment. 1968, the first computer kit was introduced, and it was advertised in CQ, which was a magazine for amateur radio operators. Dave Digby was the guy that advertised this, and it used a memory that was a delay line memory, which means first in, first out. The memory worked serially. You couldn't random access the memory. Okay. But he must have sold one or two of these things. I don't think he sold very many. First book that was written on how to build your own computer was written in 1967. And also in 1968, National Radio Institute, which put out courses for people studying electronics at home, introduced a computer kit and it actually had 52 ICs. It had a 32-byte memory. In other words, 32 words. Okay. And 15 instructions. So it was really a training thing, but it still was a digital computer. In 1970, I was teaching at Union County Technical Institute, and which was in Scotch Plains, and I formed a computer club with my students, and we had obsolete computers there that we refurbished and we got up and running, and this was one of the systems that we had gotten there. This was a PDP-5, and the instruction set had been modified to actually execute PDP-8 instructions. This is one of the logic cards here. Remember I told you about those logic cards that were plugged into the PDP-8? This is what a logic card would have looked like. This card here had a total of 6 inverters. That's all that was on it. And this came in 3 19-inch rack panels. It had a ASR 33 teletype. Anybody ever used the teletype? Okay. So you know what this thing was? It had a tape reader punch here where you could store your programs or read in programs. And in DEC, hackers had created a lot of software for the DEC mini computers. They had created a version of BASIC, a BASIC interpreter, a focal interpreter, an assembler, a compiler, a debugger, and a lot of games, and they would supply them on paper tape. All you have to do is pay for the shipping and for the copying of the tape, and you could get all of this software from them. This was long before Microsoft and Bill Gates had come up with the idea of copyrighting software. So in those days, nobody did anything like that. Here you can see some of the racks with the cards plugged in here. 1970, some more kits were introduced. Here, Ken Back ran an ad in the Scientific American, and for $750 you could buy a digital computer from them, and this is what it looked like. And this computer, it was really an educational tool because you couldn't do much with it. It had switch input and LED lights output, but other than that, it had no input-output to the device. RK introduced this computer where they actually stored programs on a roll of paper that's on a roll up there. So this was 1970. In 1972, this is Hal Chamberlain, who built a system that he designed himself, but built all from surplus parts. You can see the tape drives. I don't know who manufactured the tape drives, but he built a console, a switch and light console that sort of emulated a DEC computer, but he designed the whole thing himself and built it. And this was Hal, and that's me, and that's my son, by the way. He was a teenager at the time. But Hal was quite a unique and very inventive person. And this was another system. Roger Amadon, who lives right here in, right near Rocky Hill, he built this computer using Radio Shack. Used to sell little circuit boards, into which you could plug a TTL IC, and he bought a lot of these boards, wired them all together with parts, put it up on the table, and it wouldn't work until one day the cat walked across the table, everything fell off the table, and the computer worked. So it didn't move. And that's Roger. This was a little later, but that was his first digital computer. So that was 1973. Also in 1973, Radio Electronics magazine published an article on how to build a TV typewriter. And with my students, we built one with a surplus keyboard and lights and switches that were removed, I think, from a General Electric mainframe. And we built an interface that's right over here, to the left of the unit on a breadboard. And we interfaced it to a AT&T modem. And we were able to dial into Rutgers University to their node there on the ARPANET. And we were able to do email. Yep. Anyway, on this display, all it could do, I think, was 16 lines of 32 characters. But it was a real terrific learning experience for us. 1973, Intel introduced the 8008 microprocessor, the first 8-bit microprocessor. And CGS sold a kit that you could take that microprocessor and build a computer with it. Actually, when you got the kit, all you got was a bag with parts. You had to come up with the circuit boards and the power supply to get it to work. But it was a complete working 8-bit computer. Skelby also introduced a kit, and also you could buy an assembled computer using the 8008. And in Radio Electronics magazine, Jonathan Titus designed a computer called the Mark 8, and you could buy a set of printed circuit cards and instructions, which we did, and we built one. And actually we used a rack out of that GE mainframe computer, and the lights and switches and power supply were also from that GE mainframe computer. And we got this to work, and there were quite a few hobbyists who built this system and wrote quite a bit of software for it, a basic interpreter, and a little primitive operating system that would just do basic input-output to a paper tape reader and punch. Operating systems back in those days were very, very primitive. And all you could really do was do input and output and run a program. These were some other systems that hobbyists built at that time. And these are a little more elegant. And some of them built some very impressive systems, but these were all using the Intel 8080. The 8080 was a much more powerful computer than the 8008. Had a big 256 word instruction set and registers and quite a bit of registers, so you could do an awful lot with it. And also in 1974, in December of '74, a company called MITS introduced a kit called the Altair, and using the Intel 8080 microprocessor. And at first they were selling just a set of boards, and This was Roger Amagon's system that he built. So what you're looking at here is the control panel laying down on the bottom with switches and lights. And there's a memory, well, looks like two memory cards plugged in, stacked one on top of another. And it used a busing system called the S100 because there were 100 lines in the bus. That's where it got its name from. And this was a very popular system. And very quickly they brought out a kit that included a power supply and a cabinet and front panel with lights. And also in 1975, I founded the Amateur Computer Group in New Jersey. And this was the first newsletter that we published. At first, we called the club the Amateur Computer Society of New Jersey, but Steve Gray objected to our calling it that, so we changed the name to the Amateur Computer Group. And in the first meeting there in May, 31 people showed up for that meeting, and virtually all of them were building computers at home. These were pictures at some of our meetings here. We held 3 or 4 meetings a month. And we would get upwards, well, between 300 and 500 people at a meeting. These are some of those MIDS computers that people were building. And here is one of my prototyping boards. Here you see well, it's 50 pins on one side and 50 pins on the other side. And 2 breadboards are mounted on a card. And you could build it up with circuitry on it. And I wrote a book for people who wanted to build interfaces to S100 systems. And McGraw-Hill published it. So here you see some of them, and this guy here modified an IBM Selectric typewriter to do input-output from his system here. Also, that magazines were started for Computer Hobbyists. December '74, Creative Computing. Dave Wall, who lives right up here in Morristown, started Creative Computing magazine and Byte magazine in 1975, and Dr. Dobbs Journal in '76. These were the 3 most popular magazines in the '70s. And I wrote for all of them and published my articles. And then in 1979, I started my own magazine. It was called Microsystems Journal. And here you see some of the early issues up here, and these are some of the later issues. And I was the editor for 8 years, and it was quite a learning experience. There was a lot of software that was developed for the hobbyist computers. Kennedy and Kurtz, of course, created BASIC back in 1963, but it was a compiler, and a hobbyist later implemented it as an interpreter that ran on DEC and Data General and HP mini computers. And in 1975, Li Chi Wang implemented BASIC for the 8080, and he published all the code in Dr. Dobbs Journal. So if you wanted to, you could key in all the code and have an interpreter running on your computer at home. And in 1975, Gary Kildall introduced the CP/M operating system, the first operating system for floppy disk drives at the time. And he introduced the concept of a BIOS, which is now what all personal computers use, a basic input-output system that starts off your computer and does the interfacing to the hardware. And CPM included a file system, an assembler, a debugger, and utilities, and it was beautifully written software. There wasn't a single bug in it. And we all really loved it. He was very nice and very inventive guy, and unfortunately, tragically died in his early 50s. And also in 1976, the first word processor was introduced for, again, running on 8080 systems. It was called the electric pencil, and the following year, WordStar, which was a WYSIWYG, first WYSIWYG word processor was introduced, and things were really becoming very professional. There was a lot you could do with the computers that you built at home. 1977 saw the first database manager. It was called DBase. Anybody here ever use DBase? Ah, good. And I wrote a book for people who wanted to write programs that ran with the CPM operating system. This is self-explanatory, right? Should have gotten arrested for plagiarizing, but only got arrested for speeding. This is what a typical built-up S100 card looked like. In this case, this was an interface to floppy disks. It was a floppy disk controller. You can see the number of integrated circuits that were required for this. And this is what the wiring on the back of the card looked like. And with a soldering iron, we built up these cards. So you had to be pretty good with the soldering iron. And of course, it also took some software, mainly the CPM operating system, to manage what this controller was doing. 1975 also saw the introduction of the 6502 microprocessor, an outfit right across the river here in Pennsylvania. MOS Technology created the 6502, and it was a terrific microprocessor. This was one of our club members, and the systems that he designed and built based on that microprocessor. And you can see what his workbench looked like and what his computer looked like. 1976 saw the introduction of the Apple I, which at first was just a printed circuit card with a sheet of instructions, and then you had to get all the parts and put it all together. And Steve Wozniak was the guy that designed that, and he actually designed a basic interpreter that in the instructions he gave you all the code for it. This thing didn't have any input-output, no floppy disk or anything to go along with it. So you had to enter, if you wanted to use it, you had to enter that basic interpreter, and once you, and you could run your programs, and an interface, you had a very nice interface to a CRT, monitor type. But once you turned off power, everything was wiped out, so that if you wanted to put basic in, each time you turned it on, you had to enter it all over again. And then Steve Jobs decided to make this into a business, and he sold assembled boards for $666.66. You could buy an Apple I with 4 kilobytes of RAM, and then later on he packaged it up into a wood cabinet that was sold through electronic parts stores. So this was in 1976. These are some more computer hobbyists. guy up there on the left is Al Katz. Any of you know Al Katz? Okay. He lives right over here in West Windsor. And you can see his Altair computer, and he's an amateur radio operator. What you don't see here is that outside and back of his house, he has a huge platform on which is mounted a 24-foot dish that he rotates. So it's all controlled from his equipment down there. And these were members of the ACG NJ, and this was a, you might say, a portable computer. MOS Technology, who introduced the 6502, put out a single board computer called the Kim. And it was a complete computer, had a keyboard and a display, and also had a parallel port, and had interface. It had an operating system that included input-output to a paper tape reader type, or a cassette recorder type storage device. And quite a few of our club members built that. There's another one here with the Kim 1. We had an awful lot of activities in the club. I was president for the first 8 years, and when I retired, we had 1,600 members, with about 20% of our members outside this country or outside the state of New Jersey. Many of them outside this country. And we had a lot of activities. We had special interest groups. We had one main meeting a month, and then we had special interest groups that met, and special interest group for S100, a special interest group for 6502, and so on. We also did CPM software distribution. During that time, we put out over 1,000 discs with public domain software, free software, that we distributed to clubs all around the world. We ran a bulletin board system. Any of you ever used a bulletin board system? Ah, terrific. Did any of you log into the ACG NJ bulletin board system? Okay. And we published a monthly newsletter that was typically, could be as much as 40 pages. We did group purchasing, and our big thing was that we ran the Trenton Computer Festival. And we started back in 1976, and it's still going. It's an annual event. And back in the late 70s, early 80s, we got as many as 20,000 people at that event. How many of you go to TCF? Ah, good, great. Glad to see you. Thank you. One of our special interest groups was the Robotics SIG group, and these are some of the robotic computers that club members built. This guy here, this is Todd Blueborough. He was 14 years old when he designed and built the system, and this is a pretty sophisticated thing, because you can see the motor controllers, the motors that drive the wheels here, and the steering mechanism is here. And this is all controlled from the Kim 1 single board microcomputer. And he's loading, since this didn't have any storage on it, except when power was applied to it, he had to load in his program each time he wanted to use the robot. So that's what he was doing right here. From a cassette recorder, he's loading in the program into the memory of the single board computer. This is the Trenton Computer Festival. In the upper left there, you can see Floyd Kagan, who at the festival, we had speakers.
Talking about Sam 76.
Right.
I was probably.
Oh, you used it?
I did a little bit, but I was a big fan of that kind of stuff. That was a brilliant piece of work you did.
Yeah.
The students did it. It was fun.
Yes. We had an outdoor flea market. We had indoor commercial exhibitors. And in the early days, that's where you went to buy your parts. And here you can see she's selling parts here on the table. In the following year, the first personal computer show was started in Atlantic City. And this was a guy who exhibited at the show, and I was very impressed with what he showed there. He simulated a Star Trek environment with an S100 computer buried somewhere underneath. But he sort of moved into the spaceship. Okay, so we've traveled in time with Computer Hobbyist from 1936 to 76. And in 77, the first personal computers were introduced. There was the Apple II, the Radio Shack TRS-80, and the Commodore PET. Did any of you have any of these computers? And
using them count?
what?
Was using them count, because I used Trash 80 at Community College.
Oh, sure it counts. And the days of the computer hobbyists were at an end. Any questions? I hope you enjoyed the presentation.